Hey, what's going on, everyone? Mike here in the BFH garage. Got a 2010 JK up on the rack here. Today we're going to be changing out drive shafts. How big's your lift on this? 2.5-inch lift, running 35s, running 35-inch tires. Anyway, those drive shaft angles get extended there, and the problem is the stock drive shafts. They use that Rosetta joint on there, so it's a CV joint. But the problem is when it gets to a big angle, they're notorious for breaking the rubber boot, the grease goes flying out everywhere, and eventually they're going to fail. So on this Jeep here, we're going to put in two brand new Adams drive shafts. We're changing out the yokes on both differentials. The yokes are going to get changed out on the transfer case, and it'll have a whole new drive line there. So on top of that, we're going to be doing some skid work under here. I don't know if that's going to get included in this video or not. I want to concentrate on the drive lines for now, but that's what we have planned for this episode. All right, here are the drive shafts that we're going to be installing today. Again, these are from Adams drive shaft. This rear drive shaft has 1350 U-joints. When you go over to the front drive shaft, you're going to use 1310 joints. But those things are pretty darn sweet. We're also installing new yokes, which are right there. So you come underneath the Jeep here, you're going to take a look at this. This thing's pretty beat up in here. That's why we're going to be changing out some of these skids and everything else. But that Rosetta joint we're talking about right here. Now this is at full droop, and you can see the angle on that. But even on the one that we're really concerned about is up here against the transfer case. So even at ride height, that thing's going to be down at that angle. And the problem is that boot wears out in short order, throws grease everywhere, and you can kind of see a bunch of it right there already. And then it eventually can seize. So on the front one, see if I can get an angle here for you. Going to go back up there against the T-case. That one's going to be fun to get to, but shouldn't be too bad because I get to pull some of this skid stuff down anyway. So I'm going to do that first so I can access the transfer case yokes, get those changed out. So got a bunch of disassembly to do right now. Be back in a second. I'm sure most of you watching my channel have heard that saying that every 20-minute job is one broken bolt away from a 3-day ordeal. It's not quite that bad here, but you're going to see close up on some of these bolt heads here. He scraped them over the rock so bad that I'm having to take a grinder and grind off the edges. So a good example is that right there. This thing won't even come close to fitting, so I'm having to clean all these up. And when you do a project like this, you need to take account for all that time because it adds a lot of it. All right, we got that main skid plate out of the way down here. A lot of bolts that needed to be worked so we can get a sock on them, but that's good. So that stuff's out of the way. With that out of the way right now, you can see we have full access to the backside of this T-case here. So we're going to get this drive shaft out. I'm going to start by removing the flange on this side of the T-case and install the replacement yoke. Then what I'm going to do is come back. We're going to support the drivetrain at the transfer case with one of my pull stands or my pull jacks. And then I'm going to remove this big old honking cross member out of the way. Then I'll have far easier access to the front side of the T-case. So I'm going to start by getting both drive shafts. Actually, I don't know if I'm going to get that one out right now or not. I'm going to get the rear drive shaft out first, get it supported, get the cross member out, get the front drive shaft off, get those yokes all installed, and we're going to be moving right along. All right, if you've never taken one of these drive shafts out before, these things can be a bear. So this cap-looking piece here is attached to the Rosetta joint there, and it's tucked into this flange here. This thing's a pain in the rear to get out when they're stuck. So I'll start by giving them a few whacks with a dead blow hammer, just to try to get everything loosened up. And then behind here, you're going to notice you have your normal holes that the retaining bolts go into, and then you have two bigger holes right here on the back side. You can take a punch back here, and you can push it out just like that. You see how that thing's moving around. This one here is pretty sharp, so if you're going to reuse your drive shaft, then don't use something that's so short. But these are going to the trash, so I'm not too concerned about it. But you can see how I got my stuff stuck. There we go. But anyway, now this thing's nice and loose here. On the backside up here, you're not going to have that luxury because you don't have anything that's going to get back here. So you got to take your dead blow, give it a few whacks, and then eventually get it out of there. But it will be a struggle. The drive shaft's out. And one thing I forgot to mention to you guys, on this upper one, once you get this one out, as long as you have the bolts out on the upper one, you can use that as leverage and it pops right out of there. So you don't have to get up there and wail on it, except to loosen up, and then it should pop right out. Again, for you guys in the Rust Belt, different story for you, but that's the way it works here in Colorado. So what we need to do now is change out the flange here for a yoke. So there's a lot of differing opinions on how this gets done. Now you guys know I set up a lot of gears, and I'm normally the opinion that you use a new pinion nut, new crush sleeve if you're pulling out your gears for anything. In this case here, doing a flange. For example, if I had to change a pinion seal here, you can remove this nut, pull your flange out, change out your seal, or in this case here, change out to a yoke altogether and tighten that back up. But the thing you need to be very careful, I want to make sure everybody understands this, is that when you pull this pinion nut off here, a couple ways you can do this. One, you can mark the end of the pinion with the nut, and then you want to try to get that mark back to the same when you tighten it back up, because if you over tighten it, that crush sleeve will continue to crush. It throws off your pinion preload. So one way to do it, again, you mark the pinion and the nut at the same place, get it back to that. And what a lot of shops will do is they tighten it back up and then they'll just torque it to 150. The key to all of this, though, is you have to use a decent amount of red Loctite on those threads. You don't want that nut coming off. These pinion nuts are designed for one-time use. Their design is that way because they kind of pinch. When you put it back on, if you add that red Loctite, then you should be good to go. But it's one of those maintenance items that I would definitely keep an eye on. If you're starting to feel a weird vibration or you're starting to hear your axle make a weird noise, the very first thing I would do is check to make sure that pinion nut didn't come loose. So for me, I'm going to mark it just so I know when it's close. I'm going to torque it to 150, and if everything feels good, I'm going to go with that. And then what I'll do is I'll put a paint mark across the nut and the pinion so you can do a visual inspection at any time, just looking at it and make sure that it's not coming loose. So we're going to get this rear flange out of here first, get the yoke put on, then we're going to get the front flange off and get that one on. So that's what's up next. I don't know if you could have seen in the time lapse or not, but I tried smacking that with the dead blow hammer to see if it'd come loose. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. So I'd be prepared to have a 2-jaw puller ready to go just in case, and then that'll help pull that off. So now we have to get the yoke in. Make sure you put a thin layer of grease on there so that way it doesn't tear up that seal as you're installing that. Big thing is make sure you put on a substantial amount of red Loctite. We're going to put that nut back on there, get it tightened up, torque it, and we'll be good from there. All right, it's time to install this drive shaft. So if you noticed, my U-joint side, I taped those caps back because I'm going to install this side first. Red Loctite. So before you red Loctite these, take some brake clean, get them on there, and make sure that your threads are clean before you do that. So here we are. We have the rear drive shaft in. I didn't want to feed you up full of a bunch of boring stuff, but anyway, get those in. Let's move on to the front. All right, got the drive shaft out. This thing's a bear, I tell you what. Luckily for me, I was able to pull that cross member down because I have to change that skid out anyway. So if you're doing this on your back on concrete, I would recommend, it's what, 1, 2, 3, 4, 7, 8, 9 bolts. Support your transfer case. Get something that's adjustable to support your transfer case, which supports your drivetrain. And then once you do that, you pull that out of the way. you get access to everything in there. And that is absolutely huge in my book for accessing this thing. So I have to get this flange out of here now. And so I got to get my impact. That's another thing too. So if you're going to use a different kind of tool, that is going to be a bear. So trying to get this impact in here, I'm going to either have to tuck it in here. I'm not sure if it's going to fit with the small space, or I'll get an extension on this side, and hopefully that extension doesn't deflect enough that I can't get that nut off of there. But this is a bear. There's a bear of a job if you don't have the right tool. So before you turn to something like this, think about these things. Impact is everything here, especially getting off the nuts off the flanges and getting these pinion nuts off. Yeah, here we are. All right, working on that front side of the transfer case now. When you go to put in the yoke for that, I don't know if you can even see down there or not, but on the old flange, they have a big, thick rubber O-ring that sits inside there, and that seals the transfer case from stuff coming out. On this here, what you need to do is take a thin bead of silicone and, put your yoke on first to see where that splined output shaft comes. And then, for me, it's only like 1/4 of an inch. So I took that RTV, put it in there, and I smushed it down into the splines. When I push this on, it's going to take the excess, push it to the front. And then when the nut goes on, it's going to flatten it out and create that, the seal for this output shaft. And don't forget too, you want to make sure you put a thin coat of bearing grease on this, so that way it's not running dry on the seal. We're going to get this up, pressed on. And then, like I said before, on the rear one, make sure that you add in your red Loctite to the threads of that output shaft. I'll get this tightened up the rest of the way. We're going to torque it down to, like I said, anywhere between 130, 190 is what the directions say on this. So we'll get this, and it's time to move on to the front pinion. All right, sorry left you guys for about the last 30 minutes. We ended up putting in his armor underneath. He's got this Evo transmission pan, engine, oil pan, and then we're gonna be putting in a new cross member and all that stuff. So want to get that stuff tucked up in there with the drive shaft out of the way. So now we're back. The one thing I want to caution you on, if you're going to be putting in this Evo stuff, it requires you to take out the transmission pan bolts, not all of them, but a few of them. And when you do that, you're going to have oil that starts coming down. So you want to make sure you have everything in position, in place, ready to go right away. You can't put a pole jack or anything under there, because you're still going to have to get this up and over. So the big key to that is have everything together, ready to go. Undo those, put it up there, and start tightening right away. If not, you're going to find a little bit of oil on the floor like we did. So where we left off was I got the transfer case output yoke there. I got the yoke done up here to the front axle. Now all I got to do is install that other axle shaft, and it's going to be all done. So simple things. Same thing applies here. We have the U-bolt straps here, so be careful torquing those down. And then the other ones, just use the bolts back there that, you're going to get those good and tight and call it good. So I'll get that done, and then we'll get this thing wrapped up. All right, here we are. We got everything all wrapped up. I have the drive shaft installed here. Again, don't over torque these U-bolts if that's what you're going to use. Everything's good. The only thing we're going to have to do now is lower this thing back to the ground, and I want to check the pinion angles on that rear drive shaft to see where he's at. So the big indicator for us, more important than pinion angle, is going to be to have him get out there and drive it. Do you have vibrations or not? If you do, we'll adjust those pinion angles, or that pinion angle, to get him dialed in. I'm hoping that he's going to be good right where he's at. And that'll wrap up this project. We're still going to have to put on a cross member and all that stuff right now, but that's not part of this video. Hope you guys enjoy this simple process. And you know, Adam's Driveshaft, I've never used them. I've always used Tom Woods, or I get some work done in Colorado here at Bill's Inglewood Driveshaft. But Adam's, their packaging for their Driveshaft was absolutely phenomenal. They have notes in there that say, hey, if you bought this from a vendor or if you bought it from us, it doesn't matter. If you have problems, call us. So the support at Adams seems spot on. So I have no issues with the Driveshaft at all. And in fact, I'd recommend them as well. So everything's all set. We're all good to go. That's it.